Hey there, it's Karen with Naturally with Karen. I'm inside Starbucks in Duluth, Minnesota, and I'm bringing you a live stream tonight. Let's see if I can adjust this a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about intuitive intelligences. Why? Because if you're a shaman or a coach and you're helping other people or helping yourself to heal, you're going to need to know how to use innate. What does innate mean? They're already loaded inside you. Think of it as like being preloaded inside of you. Intelligences that are intuitive. You feel, you sense, and you don't just see with your physical eyes, you also see with your far eye, or we've also called it a third eye. The third eye chakra, right? Okay. So with your intuitive intelligences, you're going to be able to pick up on things like remotely sensing. So when you use the word remotely, think about like the remote on a television. You're sitting across the room and you're changing the channel. In a remote sensing, using your intuitive intelligences, what you're doing is you're actually feeling or experiencing, you're sensing outside of yourself, remote, away from you and your direct coherent heart field. Isn't that cool? Okay. If you go to my website, naturallywithkaren.com, you're going to see that there's a testimonial from a woman who's also a shaman, only in Africa. That's called sometimes a sangoma. And it's maybe just a little bit different, but it's about the same thing. Now, shamans are able to sense the field. That's why I called my blog Sensing the Field. Okay. And the field just means that it's a 0 point, as Lynn McTaggart talked about in her book, the 0 point field, or the ZPF. But it's essentially like this soup of energy that is very electromagnetic. So when people like Dr. Sebi talk about electric foods, they're essentially saying life-giving force foods. If life-giving force produces electricity for your body, and you live in an electrical and magnetic environment, there's 3 primary elements that I want to talk about that are going to boost your intuitive intelligences, and I learned about them when I was very young. One of them is iron, and iron magnetizes the brain. So when you go out and about, how do you have spatial intelligence, which is also kind of an intuitive intelligence? How do you know where you are and where to go, and how do you remember things in a spatial intelligence way? Is that the iron in your brain creates a kind of a compass effect. Isn't that cool? Now, the other 2 that I'm going to talk about today that are the 3 things, and I measure these in an HTMA, which is a hair tissue mineral analysis, 8-page report for $125 plus $7.50 shipping. The lab is called Trace Elements. It's been around for over 30 some odd years. It's owned by Dr. Watts, and it's in Addington, Texas. Dr. Watts actually lives in Boca Raton, Florida, and he and I have talked on the phone many times. He also gave some training to Dr. Andrew Cutler, Dr. Watts did. So some of these doctors have talked about what we need to do to solve some of our issues relative to the minerals, the heavy and the toxic elements in our bodies. Think of heavy metals like arsenic, lead, cadmium, uranium, etc. Mercury for sure in today's world. Now the other 2 elements I'm going to talk about, they work as kind of a pump. And if you watch some of my other YouTube videos, you're going to know that they're like a ratio or a pump. And that would be copper and zinc. Now when those 2 are in the appropriate balance, and sometimes, oftentimes in today's world with some of the exposures environmentally, the way the foods are. And would you believe that algicides and fungicides that are sprayed onto our foods, I'm still getting used to my new hairdo. This is just no brushing, no combing, a little bit of water and a little bit of Jamaican black castor oil, and the curls are starting to pop back up. Isn't it great? When you add excess copper, a person's going to get very estrogenic or very fluid, and you're going to see more of going into what we would call in the Western world, which is very different from a true shaman perspective. We're going to call it bipolar, mood disorder, schizophrenia, personality disorder, and they're inventing new names and codes every single day. How I learned starting in 1965 forward was that if you keep these balanced through how you eat, right? So we ate the apricots. We made jelly out of the apricots. We ate the peaches right off the trees. We ate the plums, the grapes, the bananas, right? Now today, in the last 40 years since I was a young girl, the bananas are sprayed on trucks. They're gassed so that they'll stay nice and pretty and yellow when you buy them in the stores. That's why I say only buy organic bananas. Now, if your electromagnetic balance inside of yourself is really tuned, your diet is nice and clean. And I find, I don't know about you, but I find that that's much easier to obtain on a plant-based diet. I have a plant-based course called Everything You Need to Know Plant-Based. It's on my website at naturallywithkaren.com. You'll own it forever. And it walks you through my 34 years in a super quick way, easy way. Within one weekend, you have my personal guarantee. You'll know how to make dark chocolates with superfoods if you want to, medicinal dark chocolates. You'll know about cannabis and hemp. You'll know about making spiral salads with squash and sweet potatoes. You'll know about how to make juice and smoothies, and you will know exactly how to be plant-based. It's my guarantee, and if you don't like it, you can let me know. If you love it, please let me know. Plant-based makes you much more tuned. If you're more tuned, just like you tune your guitar, you tune your piano, you tune your viola, you tune everything, right? If you're more tuned, you're going to be a better instrument. A better instrument on a physical, intuitive level is able to pick up signals better. Like today, my son and I came into Starbucks here, and a man was sitting in the same booth with the same energy, and we were going through a similar experience as we did before. And I said, "Do you see the loop, Sawa?" He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Okay, what do you see?" And quickly he pointed out this person had the same energy and this person had the same vibration on many different levels. There was something that needed to be learned, and we kept revisiting the same loop. Now, you might have seen an example of loops if you saw the movie Miss Peregrine's Peculiar Children, because they kept getting in a loop over and over in the 1940s, and the children would have to go outside of the house, and the house was going to be bombed, potentially, right? And she brought all the children back in, and all of the children were extremely gifted with intuitive intelligences. They were out of the normal, right? So when you're a young child and you're fresh from what we often call the rainbow bridge, we're fresh from spirit in a brand new vehicle, so to speak, brand new body, okay? We're much more inclined to be able to pick up on signals, sense the loops, communicate with all of the sentient life force beings, which are, we call animals, insects, but also the plants and the flowers and the trees. I will never forget growing up with a big wall in my backyard on a vine of passion flowers. And the passion flowers also communicate with us. They're an extremely amazing flowers, the passion flowers. And I felt the same way about the circle of redwood trees when I went to Redwood Glen in 6th grade as a 12-year-old. I could communicate with this circle or family of trees and receive information. Now, it wasn't in my ear as English or Spanish or French or Portuguese or anything like that, but it is telepathic insight, right? When I wake up, in what you call the morning, or I call it great rising, right? Or a grand rising, blessed rising, instead of good morning, good death, and the word sound, which we'll cover another time. I notice crow. In California, I notice raven. Now I notice eagle flying above as I take off in my Subaru. I notice the hawk. Hawk is a symbol of ancestral guidance, right? Okay. So all of these are what my grandmother used to tell me about between 1965 and 1969 in particular. She called them omens. Now today, if you say that with all these crazy movies that have been put out, or some of what religion has to say, there's some way of kind of putting them down, but in fact what they are now more often they're called, what kind of an animal spirit did you see outside? And there's great books written about them. We learned them to be omens, which just meant a sign or a signal. Okay, so your intuitive intelligence need to be tuned. We need to think about those three elements I talked about: iron, copper, and zinc. Okay, we need to think about having a plant-based diet. We need to understand that communication comes from all sentient life force energy: the insects, the birds, the passion flowers, the redwood trees, all of nature all around us, which in Kemetic science is referred to in capital letters NTR, which stands for the gods of nature, or nature itself. Okay? You really are hard pressed to find anyone that wouldn't agree or support that nature really was our first church. Nature is where we assembled together outside and we celebrated the beauty and the grandeur of nature, as we always have. Now, what about some other deeper level intuitive intelligences? Let me share those with you while we're here. In 2002, I was 42 years old and I left my native California where I was born and raised. Now, everyone knew, and I was often called eccentric, esoteric, you beat to a different drum, and then kind of some not so nice things like she's kind of off her rocker. I think she might be kind of a little bit crazy or a little bit out there. But you got to remember, if we're unfamiliar with something, it feels foreign to us. And the first thing that we need to do for a lot of us is first we preliminarily reject it because we've never experienced it ourselves. And I certainly do understand that. Now, I've had hundreds of people on my table because when I moved to Minnesota and I had worked as a senior family law paralegal in judges' chambers in Santa Cruz for the 7 judges, especially loved Judge Kelsey, Judge Attic, and Judge Stevens, whom everyone was afraid of. He was a criminal law judge for a year or two, and everyone just shook in their boots around Judge Stevens, and I thought he was the nicest guy ever. And then I ended up working with his daughter-in-law, Pasha Stevens, at the Boston Williams Attic and Gallagher law firm, which is now defunct in Santa Cruz. I worked 10 years in one family law firm with my internship in college after earning my AA degree and my paralegal certificate with an emphasis in family law specialty. So I have a little bit of background in learning how to interview people, how to sense things, how to write, how to go to court. You know, even though we couldn't argue from the bench because we're not admitted to the Bar Association, I did get to do in camera, which meant going into judges' chambers and discuss and negotiate cases. Paralegals could do that in California. And I also had my own business helping people put together family law motions for custody and support of children that the attorneys didn't want to mess with because they were $400 an hour back in the mid-1990s. So during that time, I really started to learn a lot about how the analytical world sees things. And it was a really big help for me. I think if I would have always stayed within the etheric world as I felt so comfortable, and I hadn't worked as a paralegal in the very logical, analytical world, right? The world of absorbing a lot for 18 years of legalese and even medicalese, using the Taber's Medical Dictionary to look up words that I had no clue existed. I would have probably never really came to understand or overstand how the analytical world thinks, but it's actually been a boon or a positive thing for me. So when I came to Minnesota in 2002 and I left California where I'd always lived in a few different places, but Santa Cruz, San Jose, and for 1 year in Merced, I parlayed out one of my credentials, which was massage therapy, and I licensed with the city of Cloquet. February 1st of 2003, licensed, insured, background checked, doctor checked. It was absolutely insane to me that I thought I was almost checked more, got a light in the background, more than when I had the 3 interviews and used Faces of the Nation at the Merced County District Attorney's Office, where I worked directly with District Attorney Alan D. Filippo. And if you're watching, Alan, it's Karen. I'm saying hello, or Julie Colera. Okay, so I'm putting my hands on people and offering them a really wonderful California-style Esalen massage with warm stones. I'm making all of my own product, meaning what I put on the body for massage, shea butter, coconut oil, cacao butter, whipping it up. I was also buying unrefined sesame oil because I've got some Ayurvedic training as well. And sure enough, as was happening before I was touching people in California all the time, I would see things that would open up in my arena. Many times I heard ancestors' names. I got information from the ancestors, and you'll read some of these testimonials on my website. I am an extremely humble, down-to-earth person who put most of her money while working as a paralegal into cost of living, experiences, a few travels out of the country by myself most of the time, but in the tens of thousands of dollars to become an herbalist and a massage therapist and a yoga instructor. And I just wanted to keep learning. I had such an appetite and a passion. And I infused these intuitive intelligences, plural, that I started learning as a young girl, so that when they were on the table, I would hear, I would see, and I would have a feeling or a knowing, which in the Western world, they call that claircognizance, right? Clairsentience, clairvoyance, clairaudience. They all have a prefix that means clair or clear. Clear knowing, clear seeing, clear hearing, right? As if to say that perhaps what we see with the regular physical eye maybe is not clear seeing. And so I started to really reason and contemplate with myself, why was this the case? That we weren't clearly seeing with our physical eye. And in one of the courses that I took at Mission College, it was a philosophy course, I started to realize that we are stimulated to experience the world in a very predictable way. And I'm just going to leave that right there, and I'm going to ask you to pause it on that and think about that for just a little bit, because it's going to be probably something that you contemplate over for a couple of days, not because any of us are slow or dumb, but because I think it's just something that takes us a little while. One of the testimonials on my website, because it's not all about me and about bragging, it's about introducing you so that you can understand that we all have these abilities that are loaded inside of us. They're innate, but we were never really trained to use them. And it wasn't until I was after the age of 45 that I started really getting it. I mean, really getting it, because I knew, but that most people weren't really being taught like I was being taught. And why was that? Well, my maternal grandmother, who started teaching me, who was friends with Zechariah Sitchin, she was very close with Dr. Ian Stevenson, the psychiatrist that was really heavily invested in NDEs, or near-death experiences. She had lost her firstborn son around the same year I was born, 1961. Dennis Hodges was in a helicopter coming back. It was ending his tour of duty in the Navy, and his helicopter pilot suicided into the mudflats. So my uncle, her firstborn son, was killed in this suiciding helicopter that sank into the mudflats as his fiance and all of our family watched from the shore, awaiting him to come and be married and start his new life. So that began my grandmother on a path of really more deeply, because she already had a passion, digging into what then was called parapsychology, finding Dr. Ian Stevenson and asking him about near-death experiences. Was there any way possible she was going to be able to contact her son? She loved him so much. Now, I watched my grandmother read the Bible from cover to cover. And I also listened to her because she read people like Merlin Stone. And eventually, like I did, Rianne Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade, we learned about partnership-based societies, and we learned about the fact that pre-modern religion, we actually were encouraged to use a lot of these intuitive intelligences. Today, I gotta say that I'm kind of sad because Grandma also taught me that most of the people that you're going to meet that call themselves a psychic or a medium, they're really just handing down a lot of fluff and charging people a lot of money for it because just like she was absolutely physically and emotionally distraught losing her firstborn son. When people came to me, I didn't charge them a penny, none of it. And I wasn't taking vacations. I was solo parenting a son who was almost 7 at the time. I moved to Minnesota in 2002. And I'd always been a kind of a person that really had just kind of been a paycheck to paycheck person, especially living in the Bay Area in California, one of the most expensive areas in the United States. I gave people this while they were on my table. And I just knew that the word was going to get around that not that Karen had a gift, because I don't believe that I got a gift and you didn't get a gift, because that to me wouldn't be humble at all. That to me would just be assuming that gifts were being handed out to some people, but not to others. So what I want to say very clearly, a crystal clear way of saying it is that if I'm able to use this, so are you, okay? And I am bringing you these YouTube videos so that you're able to understand that you do have them. And actually what I refer to them as most of the time is a GPS. And that's your guidance and protection system. That's not circumventing God or Jesus, your religion, or your belief system. It just means that as much as you pray for things to happen in your life and for God to help you, that you also have the option to take personal responsibility. If someone is not well and everyone starts to pray for them, that's one form of medicine. But the other form of medicine that I encourage people to do is to take personal responsibility. You can't eat Whoppers every night and complain that you have cancer. You have to do something about it, right? Okay. So now, as I'm sitting here in Starbucks in Duluth, Minnesota, it's 28 degrees. It's dark outside. You can see the window behind me. My son and I are sitting here. I just want to share with you, your intuitive intelligences are yours. And it does take time, just like if you start out a yoga practice. Well, in the first year or two, you're really not going to be as good at yoga, as flexible in the spine, as flexible in the mind, because a flexible body is a flexible mind, right? Okay, you see people that are very stiff and rigid in the body, they have a tendency to be a little bit more stiff and rigid in the mind, okay? So this is not the kind of YouTube video or live stream today for someone who's stiff and rigid in the mind. You'll never be able to fully load your own innate abilities. My abilities have gone way off the charts to the point that most of the time when I talk with other psychics, mediums, and other people, they feel a little bit intimidated. But what I want to say is keep it humble like I am and do those things with the plant-based diet most of the time. Tune yourself, learn how to develop it by communicating it with other people, learn to trust it, learn to nourish yourself. The more substances, just like if you're a cigarette smoker, it's going to increase your thyroid incidence of imbalance and disease by 42%. So it's not the easiest thing to do. Take it from me, I'm a former cigarette smoker as a teenager. Do some of these habits to tune yourself so that you can reach a higher vibration, not because you're gifted, not because you're more special than anyone else, but because you want to be able to access and use these. They're going to help you. They're your guidance and protection system in addition to your higher power, your creator, your religious, your belief system, because I don't want to offend anyone. Okay? You would be able to hear, you would be able to see, you will be able to experience colors differently, and what many of us psychologists, many a psychologist would term synesthesia, which means an abundance of feelings and sensory ability, so that you taste colors or, sound is experienced differently. The opposite of synesthesia is anesthesia, right? We use morphine, heroin back in the day, fentanyl. We use anesthesia to shut down the senses. Synesthesia is heightened senses, okay? So I'm going to say so long for now. I'm going to ask you, please subscribe. And the reason I want to do that is because each one will reach one. The more we learn from elders, the more we learn how to take care of ourselves, the more tuned we become, the more compassionate and the more empathetic, empathic people will be amongst us. The human really needs two things: safety and love. And with those, we can co-create the world in a whole different experience. We can build a world family. If you didn't watch my last two videos, my dreadlocks were down to the end of my back. I cut them half of the way and then I cut them shorter. And then I combed out what I could. And this is no combing. This is sort of just scrunching. My curl is coming back. It's a big change. It feels kind of good. I hope you're all well. Please subscribe. Please share this. Please don't be offended. Please understand you have a guidance and protection system. All right, so long until next time.